Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 757 of the podcast, and it is Monday the 17th of June 2024 as I record this. In today's in-between-isode, I'm talking to Rachelle Ayala about collaborative writing with AI. Rachelle has a PhD in applied maths and previously worked in neural networks, so she understands the fundamentals of how generative AI works, and she's great at explaining it to normal people. She's also been a prolific romance writer for years and now uses AI tools at different parts of her creative process, adapting to new options as they emerge. We talk about the misunderstandings around generative AI, how Rachelle uses AI as a discovery writer, how you can quite easily spot a story written by ChatGPT without the human element, how you can use the tools for story ideas and scene beats, how different models are good at different things, why you need to give the AI tools a lot to work with and actively drive the creative process, completion prompting, the importance of AI for accessibility and how it helps people with disabilities, illness and also English as a second language, how we need to adjust our value in terms of word generation, aspects of copyright, ethical prompting and so much more. We talk about a lot in this episode. So today's show is sponsored by my wonderful community at patreon.com/thecreativepenn, where you can find tutorials on various AI tools, including Claude, ChatGPT and Midjourney, and discover how I use generative AI ethically as part of my creative process for writing, aspects of cover design, book marketing and more. There are also monthly patron-only Q&A episodes, extra content on craft, author business and book marketing and more. Thanks to all patrons who've been supporting the show for years and months. And if you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join more than 1,100 authors. Join us at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Right, let's get into the interview. Rachelle Ayala is the multi-award-winning USA Today best-selling author of playful and passionate romances with a twist. She also has a series of books for authors, including Write with AI, an AI author's journal, and AI fiction mastery. So welcome to the show, Rachelle.
Well, thank you, Joanna. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm super excited to talk to you. And as I was just telling you, I have the ebook and the print edition of AI Fiction Mastery because I think you put things so well in your writing. But before we get into it, tell us a bit more about you and your background in technology and also writing.
Oh, okay, sure. I was a math major and I actually have a PhD in applied math. So you would think that's kind of the farthest thing from writing. But I got into parallel computing back in the 80s and early 90s, neural networks, where we were basically trying to recognize handwritten characters between 0 to 9. So that was quite interesting and fascinating. So I basically worked in software development and network management until 2011, and then I got into writing. So romance writing was my gig, and I like dealing with feelings and happy endings.
Well, I love that, going from maths and neural networks into romance. And you do explain a lot of the stuff behind AI in your books, which I think is really good. And because you're used to writing for normal people, I don't find your writing technical at all. But do you think people who are not very technical are struggling with this AI world at the moment?
Well, I don't even think you need to be technical to understand AI because, well, there's different types of AI, but we're talking about large language models for writing. So there's other AI systems like expert systems, machine learning, and people have been using that. You know, they don't even know it, but they've been using it under the hood. But what the AI we're talking about large language models is ChatGPT was one of the first ones that most people became aware of. And so a GPT is a generative pre-trained transformer. You could think of it as a word slot machine comes to mind, where you could think of all these slots. And so when you write a prompt, then the AI will look at the words that are in there and then try to predict the best word that comes after. Let's say we say Monday, Wednesday, and most people will say Friday because that's the next word that you think of. Or if you say Monday, Tuesday, most people will say Wednesday. So what the AI does is it was trained on like reading, like I think somebody said between 500 billion or 1 trillion pieces of text. When the AI is trained, it's not reading a book like we do, where we read it from beginning to end. So think of if you cut a piece of newspaper into a strip or a square, and then it's got all these words that are in there, and it's looking for words, associations, and patterns. So it'll say, oh, this word goes with that word, and those words go together. So it could take a word like, say, bark. If it sees dog in the other slots, it's going to, most likely, it might come out with woof. But if it sees trees in the other slot, then it might say the bark is wrinkly or hard, and it's thinking of a tree bark. So that's how it is able to create words that are that's why you think it's intelligent, because it understands the context. And it does so with these huge, huge context windows. So I don't want to get too technical, but a context window is how many words can it keep in its memory, so it could look at all these associations and how those words go together, so it could best predict the next word that comes out of this word slot machine, so to say. And it doesn't remember anything. So
it's interesting. And you mentioned words there like associations and patterns, but I feel like the big misunderstanding with large language models is that some authors think that it's more like a database where all these stolen, in inverted commas, books are sitting in a big database. And then if you query it, it will pull out exact chunks from other people's books and use them. So you're always going to plagiarize, or you're always going to be stealing, in inverted commas. Like you and I hear these words a lot from authors who are really just starting out. So can you explain why it's not a database?
Well, databases are storage. And then so you query a database, it pulls out exactly what's in there. I mean, this is like your social security number. It's not going to get it wrong. It's going to pull it right out. Your birth date, if it's entered in correctly, it will pull it out. And everybody knows that AI doesn't get things correct, or it doesn't get things exact. If you prompt it twice with the same prompt, like say, write me a story about a road runner who is sick or something, and it's going to write you something different. But even that, if you think about how they trained AI, they trained it by inputting all these words that are associated together, and then they adjusted the weights of these words are more likely to be with those words. They're not retaining the words. The words are thrown away. The only thing it keeps is the weights. So it's sort of like when you read a book, you're not, unless you have a photographic memory, you cannot recall that book. But you can recall the concepts because you have made associations between what you read and it communicated to you these ideas. In fact, people say our memories are not like videos. Our memories are actually assembled whenever we're recalling something. So it's like we are making things up on the fly based on all the associations that we've had all our lives. And similarly, that's how AI, LLM it really is making up things. So when people say it lies to you, it's like, no, it's actually just making things up because you gave it a prompt. You gave it a prompt that said, like, say, happy birthday to me. And it just keeps going with that. And there's also something called a temperature knob where you could basically increase the randomness because, it's boring if it always gives you the same answer. So they built into this randomness thing where it's going to look for either the most probable or the next most probable, or it has a whole list of probable words that come next. And if you turn on that temperature, you dial it all the way up, you're going to get gibberish because the other thing that LLMs, they've literally read the kitchen sink. It's not just literature. They read code. So a lot of times if I turn up the temperature, I'm prompting it, and all of a sudden it's just all this code, gibberish code that comes out of it. So that just shows you it has no memory.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the reasons why the legal cases are so complicated and why people actually need to have some technical idea. It's not just a case of like copying and pasting. But let's talk more about your creative process. So you're a discovery writer, which I love, although you have given tips for outlining in your books. But can you tell us, how does your creative process work with AI? Are you just writing a prompt and then hitting publish?
Oh, no, definitely not. I think the first time I got on GPT, and I'm sure every one of you guys have done it, you said, write me a novel. And then ChatGPT wrote a 200-word story about some rabbit jumping across a meadow, and it might have seen a turtle, and it's like a kid's story. And so it's interesting and it's fun. And I think today they probably won't do any of that because they put some processing in where it will probably say, please give me enough detail. But at the very beginning, it would happily go off and write this little fanciful story. So getting back to, I'm a discovery writer, but I think I have also learned about story structure. So very early in writing, I realized that if I just sat there and meandered around with my character, we could do all these interesting things, but it would not be telling a story, which a story has to have some kind of meaning behind. So it's characters, they're going through actions, they're experiencing things, but there needs to be an emotional meaning behind it, or something where readers want to find out what happens next. And so I did study story structure. I think I read Larry Brooks' book on story engineering. So I know about the inciting incident and the progressive complications. And there's like this midpoint reveal. And so you kind of have to have those things in the back of the mind. And AI actually does not know all of this, because the other thing we've all not all, but most of you probably tried is, if you type in what you want the AI to do for the story, it takes the most direct point. And so like for romances, this really doesn't work, because the romance thrives off conflict, right? It means there's attraction, and then there's this push and pull of, okay, I'm really attracted to this guy, but he's got some things that just kind of doesn't work. And so it's the push and pull between the attraction and the conflict, and two people working things out. And both of them are flawed, but we believe in redemption, and we believe that everybody deserves to be loved. And so the reader's really looking for how this is going to work out. Well, the AI would just say, okay, so we talked about it, and then happily together we can face these things. I mean, it's really so, innocent. It's like, oh, well, why don't we just talk it out, and then they walk hand in hand and face the future with determination.
Yeah, that's a ChatGPT story.
Yes, of course.
What are some of the ways you do use it in your creative process?
Well, actually, every book I've written with the assistant of AI, I've done something different, and that's because the tools change so fast. So I think at the beginning with ChatGPT, I was just asking it questions about, let's make up some mythological figures that can do this or that, or some magic. And so I was just asking, sort of using it like a search engine, which it's not, because it's making stuff up, but just heightening descriptions and things like that. So I think I talked about that in my first book, Love by the Prompt, which was basically just brainstorming, asking it, give me premises for a romance, or give me enemy to lover stories, and so it was doing that. And at that point, it couldn't write more than 300 words or so. And so we weren't really using it to write prose. We were using it maybe to enhance your descriptions or bring in things that you didn't think about. But the speed of AI went so fast. So by the time in the summer, when I wrote the AI author's journal, we were actually writing scenes. And the way we were writing the scenes is we would list out the scene beats. So these are just very basic actions of, they walked down the street, there was a gunfight going on, there was a sheriff came in, so basic beats, we were doing that and then laying that out. and feeding it to the AI so that the AI would kind of fill it in. And so you're really leading it like a horse to water. It's like, come on this way. Okay, now you're going to do that. And it was really funny to see what it would do in between. I happen to like hallucinations. I think a lot of authors don't like it. I really get a crack up when it goes what they call off the rails. I'm like, oh, really? Okay. Yeah, this is funny. And so that's how I was using it. It wasn't like this prescriptive thing where I already knew beginning to end, and it's just going to, I'm going to lay it all out and then push a button, and this is going to go through. It doesn't listen to you anyway, so you're not going to be able to. Even if you're an outliner and you have a 80-page outline, you've got everything listed, at least I should say, you can make it listen to you by dialing the temperature down and using one of the more boring models, but I don't think you're going to like what it comes out, because it will be very concise and succinct, and it would just literally stick to your beats like glue, and you're just like, it's not expanding from it. And so then why bother have AI write it? But at the same time, if you turn the temperature up, it might deviate, and it might deviate in really fun ways, or it might be like, no, this is not what I want you to do. You've already solved the problem by chapter 2.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the temperature dial, as you mentioned, that's really only available if you go through more like the playground options. If people are just using ChatGPT, for example, there is no particular temperature dial in that section.
There isn't. And it's really interesting now because they give you access to the latest 4.0 as well as 4 and 3.5. And if you really want some of the more quirky stuff, you need to go back to 3.5. It's in a sense much more innocent. It will just do things and happily go off and do something. Whereas 4.0, I've noticed, is much more I guess they've made it more what they call safe, but it feels more like business writing a lot more, because what 4.0 will tend to do is whatever you give it, it's going to make a bold heading, and then it'll give you some bullets, and it's another bold heading. And you're like, okay, so you just summarized my sing brief, and you didn't put anything creative in between. And that's what brings me to Claude. I really love Claude because Claude is the other chat. So if you're beginning, I think most people say, well, yeah, we got to get ChatGPT. And ChatGPT's, I think, because it's more structured for business, it's much better at writing the sing briefs and the outlines. It will stick to the topic. So if you wanted to outline, for nonfiction especially, and I think Gemini works good for that too, is that it will stick to the outline, and you can work with it and say, okay, I'm going to write a nonfiction book about, let's say, decluttering, and it will help you stick to it. Whereas Claude, I think, is a little bit more freeform, and it might in an old Claude too, it might balk and say, I do not feel comfortable being judgy about somebody's hoarding problem. But I think the new Claude 3, they've loosened that a bit. And so it will be more creative, but it may be less structured. So I think ChatGPT, you could use it for structuring and writing your outlines, and even your sing briefs or chapter briefs. What we talk about when we talk about sing briefs is you need to give the AI a lot more information. Just telling it, write me a sing of a cute meet between a cowboy and a waitress, it gives it too much leeway. So a sing brief basically is a piece of information, and we call this mega prompting, but we're giving it information of the characters in the sing, the settings of the sing, and then the beats. What's going to happen first, second, third? What's the inciting incident? What are the progressive complications? And I'm using the story grids way of developing sing. So you have the progressive complications, and then you have some kind of crisis, because there has to be something to motivate your protagonist or to challenge your protagonist, and then some kind of decision where that's made to move the sing forward. So if you only have a sing that only has beats and there's no sort of story element in it, then it's not going to work. So that's why you have to do a lot of leading.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned leading there, and also the different almost personalities of the models, and also the fun. I mean, I feel like it's a back and forth process. It's like I might ask chat for a list of things that might go wrong in this particular situation, or places where I could set a scene. I think I use chat GPT for a lot of lists of options, and also marketing. I think it's very good on marketing copy. And then, as you say, with Claude, I think you call it completion prompting. I might upload what I've written so far and then say, okay, what are like 10 ways this scene could continue? And it will help in that way. So I think it's being more fluid almost, isn't it? Going backwards and forwards, and you have ideas, it has ideas, that kind of thing.
Right. And I've discovered I like Claude's Sonnet the best, because Sonnet will actually write, if you go through a workbench or a playground type of thing, and I go through Future Fiction Academy's Rexy, where I get to specify every parameter and including the length of the output. So with Sonnet, if you tell it to write a 3,000 word, so we always say write a 3,000 word scene. Some people used to say 10,000, hoping ChatGPT will. It doesn't work that way. They have a parameter called max length that they've already programmed in the chat, and you don't know what it is, but it's probably not going to be that long, because you're sharing the chat with so many other people. You're doing a flat fee and they're paying by the token. But when you go with the playgrounds or through Rexy, you can specify a max length. And like I said in the book, all of them, even the million context windows, they may have 100,000, 200,000 tokens that you can feed in. The maximum output is 4,096 tokens, which is roughly around 3,000 words. So some of them they're like the C students. You tell them do 3,000 words, they do 500, 700. But Sonnet, I found in Haiku, will gladly go up to your limit. However, if you didn't give it enough information to prompt, it will just kind of get repetitive and have your character doing the same thing over and over in different ways. But that's your fault. You didn't give it
enough. And I think this is really important. You're still not just copying and pasting that scene, right? You're not taking that scene out of Haiku or Sonnet and then pasting that and then publishing it. So just explain how you are leading the AI. How are you editing? Because I still think people are afraid that we're just going to lose our creativity and the AI will do all the writing, whereas that's not really what's happening.
Well, first, I just want to say there is no wrong way to use the AI. And I know a lot of everybody's process is different. So there are authors who will, and they spend a lot of time with their outline, and whether they're using ChatGPT or they're just working on it by themselves, everything is going through this person's filter, this person's creativity. It's not like your work. So even if someone works a long outline and then tells the AI to write these scene beats, write what I just gave you, that author has put in all those scene beats. That author has said, this is the emotion I want in the scene. That author has said, this is what's going to happen. So even the most prescriptive author, like say that architects it from the beginning to the end, that person has put themselves into that story, because it's not like AI is just going to write you a story. Because the other thing I think people forget is that it's humans that tell stories, because we're the ones with the emotions. AI might just see a list. When we see a list of things happening, a lot of it depends on the context, right? So for example, you see a man punch out another man, it depends. If it's on the theater, on the stage, you laugh, right? But if it's on the street right in front of you're like horrified. So these contexts are all happening emotionally in the human being, and AI will just describe, okay, this man punched the other one and he hit his jaw and the blood went flying, and it will describe the stuff, but the storyteller is putting the emotional context into that scene, and what the reader is going to feel. That's coming from the human. Whether the AI writes the words or not, or even draws the cartoon or not, that's the medium of how you're communicating that story. That's eliciting the emotion. So I think I don't worry whether you're a plotter or a pantser. It's more just believing that the story is coming from you, whether you dictated it, transcribed it. I just look at AI as it increases the accessibility of storytelling for people. Maybe English is your second language, or you're a visual person.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like because we describe ourselves as writers, and for a long time we've used this number of words written, you know, people will say, oh, I wrote 2,000 words today, or I wrote 10,000 words today. And we've really used value of being a writer on how many words we write. And therefore, I think people are struggling because if you can generate 3,000 words with one prompt from an AI, and that's where we are now. I mean, goodness knows where it will be in a year or two. And I think I did, and maybe other people are struggling with this question of what is our value if it's not generating words? So how do you see that question?
I think your value is making sure those words are words that people want to read, because it can generate. And that's the same with whether you're doing your messy draft or not too, right? I mean, before AI, I wrote 90 books. I can write 50,000 words in 2 weeks. I've done all the NaNoWriMos and all of that. So the thing is, you, as the creative person, you can generate the words. It may not be words anyone wants to read. Maybe you don't even want to read it. So you're also the curator of those words. So not only are you the prompter of those words, basically, it still comes down to you're the storyteller. You have to have a story worth telling. I mean, you don't want to just report what you see without putting meaning into it. That's the meaning into it is what gives you the story, because ultimately the story is a human to human communication. Whether I'm talking to you face to face and telling you what happened to me like last Friday, or I'm communicating through a novel, it really is still, like I would say, heart to heart, because it will come from my heart. But when you read it, it's going through your heart. And yeah, and like I said, the AI can throw out a lot of words. And some of the time, I have to admit, I don't even read what it gives me, because I'm like, ugh. And sometimes I ask it for ideas, and then I do exactly what it doesn't say to do, or it sparks something totally opposite of what, or just unrelated. Because as a discoverer, you're a discovery writer, right? So you know that ideas don't come until you start moving. It's like getting on a bicycle. So as soon as I could, before I even sit down to write a scene, I could say, oh, this is what's going to happen. I think I know what's going to happen. But when I start writing it, it's like something else. I think it just pops into my mind, and then it deviates. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so this is the point. It's like we are the ones with the creative drive. We have the ideas, we have the prompts, we have the story, we have the emotion, and the AI tools, they're just tools. But someone has asked me that they worry that they might not be able to find their voice if they start writing with AI, or that they might somehow lose creativity in some way. What do you think about that?
I actually think it's valid, because I've been writing, I don't know, 12, 13 years. And so you develop the voice by just writing, free writing. And I think it is valid, because I find myself, if I read too much AI, I find myself kind of writing like them, like using some of the same phrases. So it becomes like, because we're sponges, we absorb what we read. I mean, that's how we developed our voice. We read lots of books, right? You probably have your favorite authors, or if you're like me, I read across multiple genres. I love everything I read. And we are human sponges. We're like, the LLM is just like us. I mean, if you notice ChatGPT, it read a lot of fan fiction. So it has a lot of the same names that it gives, and the same things that are always happening. And it's only because it's read all these fan fiction sites. So it tends to write like fan fiction. And so you do have to, I worry about that too, because I look at it and I say, oh, I don't want to sound like Chat GPT. And if I keep reading what it writes, sometimes I catch myself. I'm like, oh.
Oh, that's interesting. It's funny. I haven't felt that at all, but I feel like this comes down to being confident in your voice. So I think when we've been writing as long as we have, we kind of know when it sounds like us. So if I read something, I'll be like, that doesn't sound like me. So maybe I didn't write that, or I don't know where that's come from. And so certainly in my editing process, I edit pretty hard in order to bring my voice if I do use any words. But I really think that maybe people will just learn to write in a different way, in that we wrote with the internet. So we've had the internet and we have learned and written in that particular way. And that people growing up now, kids at school, this is now free. Kids at school are going to use these tools. Right. So they will probably just learn in a different way. But I still think it comes down to what you as a creator have as your creative drive. And I think that is really particular to you.
Right. And actually, I think we don't have to worry as much going forward, because as we've seen, Claude 8, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus, they write differently. And I think a lot of what we think is AI-isms is from ChatGPT 3.5, because that was the first one that came out. And you're right. The kids that are growing up today, they're going to be reading as much AI-generated content, if not more, than, the classics. But you could always go back and read the classics too,
Yeah. So there's definitely the responsibility of the creator. And I guess we're saying, and I say I'm an AI assisted artisan author. Mm-hmm. So it's still my work. It's what I want to do. But I am interested in what you think about copyright in the USA, because in the UK, our copyright law is that anything created by a machine belongs to the creator. But in the US, you have quite a lot of copyright rulings that still haven't happened around that. So how do you think about that in the US?
Well, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the legal things are. And I think the US, and this is what I think, they think there has to be some kind of human touch in it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so they're trying to measure how much of the human touch. And an analogy is like taking a picture. And I think immediately when people probably thought, oh, well, all you did was click the button and you took a picture, but the copyright office ruled that, but you had to set up the shot, you had to adjust the lighting, you had to catch it at the right moment. So the camera didn't take the picture well, actually you can set the camera to take, multiple pictures. And nowadays you might have a video camera that's just been watching something, right? And AI could pick out the best shots. But at the time they granted copyright to photographs, the thinking was a human was behind it. It pushed the button and it composed a shot. I actually think AI prompting is actually more work, because what they don't see is everyone just thinks that you just push the button and out pops an article. And that's not the case. So I went to a seminar where one of the lawyers said, oh, well, it's all in the prompts, if the originality is in the prompts. And which does go back to the plagiarizing. If you copy and paste somebody's work into the prompt, and you can get AI to spit that back out, but that's on you, because that was in the prompt. It wasn't AI's fault. And so the lawyer said that, and believe me, all your prompts are stored somewhere. I mean, sure, they have not discarded any of the prompts. So he's saying that in the future, he thinks cases will be decided by looking at how creative the prompts were.
That is really interesting. I totally agree. And it's one of my sort of red lines. I say to people, don't use other people's names or brands in your prompt, whether that's images or music or authors. I can use my name in a prompt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not going to use your name. I'm not going to use Stephen King. I'm not going to use Dan Brown. I'm not going to use other people. I'm not even going to use dead authors, because I want my own voice. So I think that's really important. It is also interesting because in the early days, I say the early days, like
that's
November.
Last year, yeah.
Yeah, like last year, I was still taking screenshots of prompts.
Oh, yeah.
in
Because you're like, I got to
case.
save these.
Yeah, I've got to say, well, no, so that in case I had to prove that this was my own work. So I was keeping that. I took pictures of my edits. Like, I was quite paranoid last year.
I didn't do
but
that.
now we're in kind of mid 2024. I'm starting to relax a lot more. But let's just think about what's happened. I mean, as we're speaking now, last week they released 4.0 Omni. We've had Google releasing Gemini 1.5 further. Microsoft has announced new PCs that will have AI in them. I mean, the pace is so fast now, and Apple's going to announce something soon. So how do you adjust as these things come along? Are you, as you said, I guess earlier, are you changing your process all the time? And how do you stay focused rather than getting sidetracked?
Well, it is harder to stay focused because there's always some new toy that comes out. And just yesterday, I got into the Hunch beta, which is basically a drag and drop prompt sequencing. So you can put in context blocks, and then you can drag that context and feed it into these AI blocks, and it does something to transform it. And then you could feed multiple context blocks into AI block and multiple AI blocks into another one to aggregate the content, or you could split it out in different ways and use different LLMs for each output. So yeah, it's hard to stay focused, but I think once I get into a story, I do focus on that story. And then I keep kind of a ear to the ground on what's going on. And so I joined the Future Fiction Academy because it's a group of people, Elizabeth Ann West, Steph Pajonas, and Leland Artra, who they are all over the place looking at all this AI. They are also real writers because I knew them from indie publishing 10 years ago. And so they look at these tools and they're always thinking of new methods. And it's not just them, it's the whole group in Future Fiction Academy. Somebody will say, oh, did you see this Hunch thing? So Hunch was brought in by somebody else who said, I used this to sequence these prompts, and I wrote my sing briefs, and then I had it 5 different LLMs write the sing, and then I'm going to have to look at them all and pick out the best ones. And so by joining a group of active authors who are focused on their writing, because each one of these authors are still focused on their author career and not the AI. So the AI is a means to an end, not the YouTubers where they have their uses too, but they are focused on the AI. So they're always looking at the new AI and how it came out. And that's great to also subscribe to a few of their channels. So you kind of know something's coming, but well, okay, I'm not going to distract myself with the new music stuff because I don't really use music in my work, but I know it's there, type of thing.
Yeah. So, well, what do you think's going to happen next? I mean, how do you think things are going to change in the next year or two? I guess we're looking at maybe GPT-5, which might be another step up. I guess some people think that will just mean we can write books even faster. But as you said, you were writing books pretty fast before, and romance authors are fast. So I don't really see it as a speed thing. I see it as an interest thing, or I don't know. How do you think things will change, both creatively and in the business of being an author?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, look at ChatGPT 3.5. Now we're looking at it like training wheels. And what we have today is Omni, and like you said, GPT-5 will come out. I don't really know. I just know that as long as these companies are fighting it out, we get access to the latest and greatest. So I think I'm more worried about when the industry consolidates and all the best writing tools, the AI that's able to not just, spit out words, but the one that can analyze novels. And believe me, I'm sure these publishing companies already have it. And especially, I have heard somebody say that Netflix actually has analyzed streaming behavior of their customers. So they know when the customers quit watching the video, they know when they rewound, and they knew when they watched it all the way through without stopping. And so they've analyzed those story structures to come up with better stories. And I'm pretty sure that anybody who owns a reading app knows exactly, because we buy a lot of books we never read. I mean, especially free books. You downloaded them, maybe opened into the first page, read the first page and dropped it. Those owners of those reading apps know full well which books are caught on, which books are the ones that it's 3 a.m. and you haven't stopped and you just keep going and going and going and going. So they have all that data. And so once they train their AI to recognize that kind of pattern, what kind of patterns of story, not just words, because right now today's LLMs are just looking at word patterns. We're looking at AI agents that can analyze the patterns of the story, like the rising action, the conflict and tension points, all of that. Then they can actually generate story, critique the story, and then match it to what readers' preference are. Then maybe we may just become providers of experiences, I suppose.
I mean, let's fast forward. There's going to be perfect algorithmic fiction. It'll be like perfect. People will love it and they'll go and they'll get that. And that will be a lot of what people read. But that's why I say to people, you need to double down on being human, because you are not an algorithm and I'm not an algorithm. And so I think that there's still a place for the human writer, which is flawed. We have flawed writing. So I think
that's
there's room for both.
About romance is the characters are flawed, but they're still lovable.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's hope we are.
Yeah. And so that perfect story, I don't know. It's going to be interesting because it's almost like the way social media, they've done studies on dopamine hits, right? And so they made their things addictive so that you're always scrolling and looking at the videos and hitting the likes. And that's all these little shots of dopamine. So they've done all that research on how human minds work to get you addicted to the platform. And I wonder if the AI can also create books and stories that you just can't put down, and because it just kind of knows, and it can individualize this for every reader, just because if your Kindle library is as big as mine and it knows what I'm really interested in and not what I say I'm interested in, or whether I buy a book because I like the author, but then I never read their books. It knows what you're really doing, right? And it can personalize that for you.
Yes, well, we certainly live in interesting times, but it's been so great to talk to you. So tell people where they can find you and all your books online.
Well, I do have a website, RachelleAyala.net, but I think it's just find me on Amazon. Just type in Rachelle Ayala and AI Authors Journal or Romance in a Month, and then you'll find the nonfiction books. And then for the fiction books, I think type in Bad Boys for Hire or something like that, and you'll find my fiction books. And then I did recently start a new pen name using my real name, Claire Chu, Clarechu. And this is much more AI. I decided to do these humorous guidebooks that are called Misguided Guides. So my first book was Why Your Cat is Plotting to Kill You. And I have to admit, that one is much more AI generated than any of my romances. And I made the cover with Midjourney. So I'm showing this to you on screen. But
that's very cute. Yeah. Well, I think experimentation is fantastic, and you certainly do that. So thanks so much for your time, Rachelle. That was great.
Okay, sure. It's great being on. Thank you, Joanna.
So I hope you found the episode with Rachelle interesting and that it gave you an insight into a different perspective around co-creating with AI tools. As ever, I love to hear from you. Please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel, or message me on X at thecreativepenn, or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. Next Monday, I'm talking about writing hard truths and tips for writing non-fiction with Efren Delgado, who is a former FBI agent. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.